I spend most of my time here on YouTube talking about great games that I've played and loved over the years. But what about those games that were absolute duds? Every once in a while, especially as a kid who would just see some cool box art or would grab a game solely because it was based on your favorite TV show, you would end up with some pretty awful games. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, so after this video you can check out some of my other top 10s. Now let's talk about the top 10 worst games I have ever played. For limitations, I'll not be talking about blatant shovelware or games created for mobile platforms or just shitty Steam games made as a joke. In order to qualify, I had to have played the games, and they had to have released for at least one mainline console. Now let's begin.
Number 10.
Anyone who tuned into our 24-hour charity stream this past October will remember me talking about and then playing this awful game by LJN. Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six for the NES was at a distance everything I wanted in an NES game at the time. With the 90s Spider-Man animated series being at its peak, like a few games on this list, I remember seeing this game played at my babysitter's, so I just had to have it. Spider-Man faces off against his biggest foes, and I remember the gameplay looking great. Unfortunately, once played, all that gets flipped on its head. This game has quite possibly some of the worst controls of all time. Everything is delayed, overcomplicated, and incredibly janky. I did enjoy my time playing this again on our charity stream, but only because I knew what I was getting into. Spider-Man Revenge of the Sinister Six is one of those games that may just be so fun to laugh at that it's good. For these reasons, it had to sit back at the number 10 spot on the list.
Number 9.
I'm a big fan of the Castlevania series, and even the games most of the fan base doesn't like Castlevania Adventure and Simon's Quest, I really actually appreciate. But there is one game in the Castlevania franchise that I cannot enjoy. That is, of course, the N64 exclusive Castlevania 64. Castlevania 64 is like everything I hate all crammed into a single game. You've got terrible controls. The delay on some of these button presses is the difference between making a jump or falling into a death pit. The game is also riddled with fetch questy mazes that involve a lot of tedious backtracking. There's also that filthy Mandragora Nitro segment that almost always results in me rage quitting the game. You have to carry two items from opposite ends of an area and you can't jump, take more than a 5cm drop, or get touched by a single enemy or the thing explodes, instantly killing you and forcing you to start the whole damn segment over again. There are some good things about this game, however, like its graphics and atmosphere. Heck, even the story is pretty decent. But what else would you expect from a Castlevania game? All in all, Castlevania 64 is an absolutely terrible game to me, but not a complete write-off, so I guess that's why it's hanging back here at number 9.
Number 8.
Those of you who've been watching my top 10 videos for a while know that I'm a massive JRPG and Final Fantasy fan. Now, I did a full video talking about my thoughts on the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, so check that out if you're curious about the games and my thoughts on them. But in this video, I had to talk about Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. Lightning Returns takes almost every single thing I love about the JRPG genre and just chucks it out the window. You're on a constant timer and grinding does little to nothing to help you out. In fact, the only way to actually gain stats is to do some terrible side quests, which completely works against the whole limited timer thing that's going on the entire time. The story is trash, the game's mechanics are counterintuitive, Lightning herself is very stale by this point, and most importantly, the very idea of this game being made is what ruined what could have been a great ending for Final Fantasy XIII 2. So yes, despite having a fairly good combat system, Lightning Returns is the 8th worst game I've ever played.
Number 7. Young
Dookie strikes again. When I was a kid, one of my favorite shows of all time was Beast Wars. Beast Wars was a spin-off sequel series to Transformers which involved robots landing what I believe was prehistoric Earth, and in order to blend in, they could transform into the local wildlife. For the good guys, the Maximals, it meant turning into animals like gorillas, cheetahs, rhinos, and rats. But for the evil Predacons, it meant turning into insects and the recently extinct dinosaurs. Honestly, if the CGI hadn't aged so badly, I'd say Beast Wars is a pretty badass show that you should go check out. The storyline and characters were all incredibly well done. Cheetor and Rat Trap were my favorites, but Optimus Primal and Dinobot were incredibly badass as well. These characters, their designs, and the stories that surrounded them would have made for a great game. Unfortunately, Beast Wars Transformers on the PlayStation 1 is not that game. In order to encourage transforming between your Beast Mode and Robot Mode, they made it so Robot Mode slowly depletes your Energon meter, which can kill you when it runs out. You must be in Beast Mode in order to recover your Energon meter, but you can't attack at all in Beast Mode. The game is beyond clunky in its controls and visuals, it's super mazy, and pretty much none of the enemies you face in-game are actually in the TV show. I think the dumbest part of the whole thing is that you're going around trying to collect Energon crystals, but when you're near exposed Energon, it makes your Energon meter drain faster, killing you. Why am I going around collecting Energon crystals if being around Energon crystals kills me? Beast Wars Transformers for the PS1 is the 7th worst game I've ever played for so many reasons. This was actually going to be somewhere around the number 2 spot, but when I was capturing gameplay while streaming this, I was actually having a lot of fun at the game's expense. So for that, I changed my mind and put it here in the number 7 position instead.
Number 6.
Oh my god, Galarian's Ash was a game that came out right when I was in my anime is the greatest thing of all time phase as a kid. Now I don't blame myself for being like that, because in those days the only anime we would get here in Canada were absolute bangers like Dragon Ball, Cowboy Bebop, and most importantly, Akira. Akira was about a biker gang in the near future who ends up getting tied up in a government experiment plot to resurrect the powers of Akira, this crazy powerful kid who had psychic and telekinetic powers. Due to the greatness of that film, when I saw the trailer for Galarian's Ash, a game where you play as an angsty anime-like teen who gets psychic telekinetic powers from a lab and has to take on other kids who are experimented on, each with their own unique powers, I was sold. Unfortunately, Galarian's Ash was complete garbage. The powers were cool for about the first 15 minutes, and the game has you replaying the intro sequence twice in a row. This is of course after you watch a 30-minute exposition cutscene. The game is slow, boring, mazy, and I remember playing it for maybe 2 hours before vowing to never play it again. I sold the game, it was so damn bad, which is why it sits here at number 6.
Number 5.
You knew it was going to be on here, but you didn't know where. Undertale, as I've stated in my popular top 10 most overrated games video, was one of the most boring and disappointed games I had ever experienced. You play as this tired, greasy little kid as you slowly walk to the right for about 3 to 5 hours and engage in cringy, non-funny dialogue with a bunch of boring-ass NPCs. There's the odd puzzle here and there, and I found out from watching a bit of my friend DG Online's playthrough that you do actually walk to the left a time or two. But goddamn, this game was awful. Honestly, other than its undeservedly great soundtrack, if you're not a furry, you should probably avoid this game. For being hyped to the moon by its bizarre fanbase and being the most boring game I have ever played, Undertale stands bored and tired as the 5th worst game I have ever played.
Number 4.
The 4th worst game I've ever played is a fairly notorious game nowadays. Almost everyone for some reason or another knows about Bubsy 3D. Bubsy 3D has some of the worst visuals of all time, and is a bit of a mess to control as well. The game, despite having giant arrows as often as possible, still manages to lack direction, with me spending most of my time playing it being completely lost. The draw distance is some of the worst I've ever seen, the textures look like the game is still in pre-alpha phase, and most people consider the platforming to be appalling too. Now I say most people because I actually have issues playing 3D platformers due to the fact that I have zero depth perception in 3D games. This means that unless the game has a last-minute jump correction mechanic like Spyro the Dragon's Glide, Ratchet and Clank's Little Wing Hop, I cannot play 3D platformers. Even when I streamed Kirby and the Forgotten Land, a series whose difficulty is adjusted so that it can be played and enjoyed by everyone, I had to play it with my wife, who could direct me on where to move Kirby in some of the more open 3D areas. Thankfully, Kirby can float, which removes most of my issues. But why am I talking about all this when I should be talking about how terrible Bubsy 3D is? Well, because of the way the camera works and the incorporation of a glide, Bubsy 3D is embarrassingly one of the few 3D platformers that I can actually play without issue. Yes, of all the great 3D platformers out there, this heap of garbage is one that I can actually make some good progress in. I was going to rank this abomination of games higher or lower on the list, but since it's one of the few 3D platformers I can actually play, I had to have some mercy and hold it back here in the number 4 spot.
Number 3.
Now we're getting to the absolute cream of the crap. From here on out, the games are basically unplayable heaps of shit. So let's start off with the one I was looking forward to the most, Sonic 06. This game had red flags firing off all over the place long before it even came out. The reveal of this game had it locking up during the presentation, but me being a massive Sonic fan and the worst Sonic game I had ever played at the time, being the mildly offensive Sonic 3D Blast, I was still excited for this game. After all, even a mediocre, problematic Sonic game would still be good because it was a Sonic game, right? I could never be more wrong. Sonic 06 was meant to be a reboot of the franchise and would burst onto the PS3 and Xbox 360 scene, placing Sonic back at the top when it came to platforming mascot superstars. Instead, the game was an unfinished, buggy mess, with some of the worst writing and storytelling of all time. I've never finished this game, but I have looked up the story because, again, I'm an avid Sonic fan. I just had to know what happened, and goddamn, this story was awful. The fact that this game is sitting here at number 3 speaks volumes for how bad the upcoming games are, but I'm not sure if this is back here because I somehow still love the blue blur so much, or if it's because Crisis City is one of the coolest Sonic stage concepts in a long time. Either way, this game is crap. I gave it away to Reiner, one of my longtime followers on Twitch, as a gag gift. Do not play this game, Reiner. Don't do it!
Number 2.
In the great fighting game boom created by Street Fighter II's success, every game developer tried to nab a piece of the pot. Unfortunately, a lot of the times they had no freaking clue what they were doing. Brutal Paws of Fury is one of the worst and weirdest games I have ever played. The controls are really bad, which at this point in the video is just a given. But what sets this game apart from the others is in its god-awful animation and sprite work. All of its characters look absolutely creepy, and I have this for the Sega CD, which included these really strange looking cutscenes that just make you feel uneasy when you look at them. The game itself has no depth and is probably the most unfun fighting game experience ever, and I've played in a local Smash Brothers tournament, so I've got experience, man. Those smells will haunt my memories forever. For wanting to be a cool Bugs Bunny-inspired fighting game but being a bland horror show instead, Brutal Paws of Fury is easily the second worst game I've ever played.
Number 1.
There are many games near and dear to my heart that I never would have discovered had I not encountered them at my babysitter's place as a kid. Games like X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, the Commander Keen series, and most importantly my favorite gaming franchise of all time, Dragon Quest. But there are also some of the worst games ever, like the aforementioned Spider-Man Revenge of the Sinister Six, and the worst game I've ever played, Raid 2020 on the NES. The unworldly controls are just the start of it. You gotta wander around the docks shooting guys and collecting items, but the docks are riddled with, like, landmine poppies. These landmines are everywhere and practically impossible to avoid with how terrible the controls are. Simply moving up and down or left and right is challenging in and of itself. but trying to avoid landmines while shooting enemies and not getting shit on to death by seagulls is simply impossible. There are objectives you have to do, like collect certain items in order to progress, but I honestly don't think I've ever made it out of the first or second stage. There isn't a single redeeming feature of this abysmal game. Raid 2020 is an unplayable, unenjoyable mess, and has been the worst game I've ever played since I first played it as a small child at my babysitter's place. It's so crazy how some of the games that crafted who I am were first introduced to me in the exact same place where I played the worst game of all time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, share it around with your friends, and turn notifications to all, as YouTube tends to bury even your subscribed channels unless the video gets a shit ton of views already. Thank you so much for watching. Please tell me in the comments below what some of the worst games you've ever played are. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.